take a few minutes and look around the room, Zoom room and the meditation hall, see who's here, see if there's any new faces or old friends or both, usually both. Welcome. Welcome everybody online too. We did get our internet back up, so that's a good thing. We have 16 online, and maybe somebody can do a head count in the room if that's easy. So welcome to Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. My name is Thia, and I would like to talk to you about lions tonight. Lions, both male and female, roar precisely as a show of power, with females occasionally using their voices to locate scattered members of the pride. The job of the male lion is defender of the pride, protecting females and their offspring, and their deafening roar is so loud it measures 114 decibels. This is as loud or louder than the sound of a large gas-powered chainsaw, which you can easily hear inside your house. These are the ones you see professional tree guys using, and guess what? They always have ear protection on. So both male and female lions roar so loudly that they can be heard from 5 miles away. And not only do we hear a lion when it roars, if we're within half the length of a football field, we can literally feel the roar in our body, the sound vibrating through the body. And firsthand accounts of this phenomena say that it is jaw-dropping and there is simply no choice but to look for a safe place to hide. So the lion's roar in this sense is a primordial sound of dominance, of control, and of mastery of the environment. So in case you're wondering if you've stumbled into a National Geographic talk tonight, you sort of have. That information came from that source, but surely some of you may know or have guessed where we're going with this tonight, and that is we're at the close of our Summer Sutta series, and tonight will be the discourse on the lion's roar. So how many read Lion's Roar magazine? A few? Yeah. I really enjoy that magazine, and it dawned on me as I was thinking about what to talk about tonight. I didn't understand where the title came from, and I decided to look that up, see if there was a sutta about it, and I found 2 suttas out of the 10,000 suttas that are available. There are 2 called The Lion's Roar, both in the Majjhima Nikaya, and they're back to back, numbers 11 and 12. There's a short one and a long one. And so I pulled from both for this talk tonight because I found it really interesting. So I hope that you'll feel that way as well. The parallels between the symbolism of a lion as a king and the noble family into which the Buddha was born. He was expected to become a ruler at some point, take his father's place, and he walked away from that. We also see the lion as a creature of supreme strength and agility, and the Buddha modeled for us strength of resolve and extreme agility when he communicated his enlightenment to others, which this stuff can be hard to talk about. Some of these concepts are just not what we think about day to day or even experience day to day. So this picture of a male lion as a loner, a solitary and powerful creature, really fit beautifully into this Lion's Roar Sutta. Listen now to Bhikkhu Bodhi's voice talking about the lion's roar discourse. He writes, the Buddha's discourses as found in the ancient Pali Canon frequently draw their imagery from the rich and varied animal life of the Indian jungle. It is thus not surprising that when the Buddha has occasion to refer to himself, he chooses to represent himself as the stately lion and to describe his proclamation of the Dhamma, bold and thunderous, as a veritable lion's roar in the spiritual domain. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the collection of the middle-length discourses, there are two suttas which bear this metaphor as their title. These are called, respectively, the Shorter Discourse and the Great Discourse, and these designations may allude to the relative weight of the subject matter. This great discourse is called a rare revelation by the Buddha because he never talked about his spiritual powers, basically his superpowers. He never, ever mentioned those. And in this particular sutta, that is one of the things he talks about. He also talks about, he touches on every major teaching, every really big teaching in this sutta, which I'll just have time to mention and not go into. But both of those things entitle him to roar, this lion's roar, in the assemblies of human beings and gods. Both suttas, Bodhi says, are of paramount importance, each delivering in its own way a testimony to the uniquely emancipating nature of the Buddha's teaching and the peerless stature of this teacher among the spiritual guides of humanity. So these teachings have been a lion's roar to me personally, and so I really was drawn to this. I'd like to touch on some of the content now of this particular sutta. It's unusual for the Buddha to sing his own praises, but some of the declarations that he makes in this sutta, he points out that none of these teachings have really been offered before. He was living in a Hindu culture and raised in that culture, and what he brings forth here is very distinct and different from the views of the Brahmins in that day. And so it took a lot of courage for him to stand in front of assemblies of his peers and very learned people and say some of the things that he said that he had learned and experienced. So he's basically talking about the singular greatness of his teachings, which was another thing that he never did. He was very humble and rarely compared his teachings to other teachings. And he was very careful to tell his students not to do that, not to brag, but simply to just be very skillful in their speech, humble, and use compassion and wisdom to bring people to the teachings. So what he says is that we are never to disparage others. Instead, use wisdom and compassion to create skillful dialogue about the greatness of these teachings. That this is a spirit of non-competitiveness, which is one of the things I really love about Buddhism. There's room for every spiritual path here. He advises that folks exploring this path must first agree on the goal. Like, what are we doing? Why did we just sit in a room completely silent together for 30 minutes? We're studying our minds and our hearts. We're looking at our behaviors in order to reduce or even eradicate suffering and the suffering of others. Once we can agree on that goal, then we and they are advised to further refine the discussion by describing the attributes of the people in the room, the people on the path. Who is able to attain this agreed upon goal? These were bhikkhus, but they were also town people. So the Sangha was a mixture, but it was mostly monks at that time. But he made his talks available to everyone. He said that we should be dedicated to the path. We should be admirable, free from overindulging and quarreling, and that we should be truth tellers with faith in their teacher, the Buddha, his teachings, the Dhamma, and that we should live in harmony with others in the Sangha, that these attributes make for a worthy student on the path. Then he really opens it up and declares that the unique wisdom of the teachings are built on right view. And he dives right into some of the deepest and hardest to understand teachings in his whole retinue. He opens with the three characteristics of existence, that everything is impermanent, that nothing should be expected to be perfect, and that it's all impersonal. He moves to the view of dependent arising, which we rarely approach because it's such a deep teaching. But the nutshell teaching is that all beings are interconnected and dependent on one another for being. And we kind of experienced that during COVID when we lost so much connection and the supply chain broke down and our lives changed. And everything has been different ever since then. That was just a small example. The other part of dependent arising, though, is that each specific being is a series of causal links unfolding and inevitably progressing into old age, sickness, and death, followed by rebirth, unless this chain of dependency is seen interrupted and broken. So dependent arising is a huge topic, you can tell, and it was the first time that it was taught. Lastly, the Four Noble Truths of suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path to cessation, he said, must be penetrated and understood for lasting wisdom to arise. So he gives a much more detailed discernment of these precise conditions required for waking up, for enlightenment. And all of these teachings were very different from what was being taught at the time. When he does this, though, he shifts the discussion away from assessing individuals, comparing people, or even looking at belief systems. And he reframes this in terms of a general evaluation on looking at the way things are. He keeps coming back and saying, how do we most skillfully work with reality? That's what we really need to be figuring out in order to be released from the bondage of our own minds, which, we're all kind of crazy, right? This is the roar in itself. It's not comparing itself with anything. It's simply saying, look at life this way and see what you find to be the case. And then, report back to me. What did you find? He lists all the austerities that he went through for 6 years as he studied and sat with many teachers, and he eventually excelled every one of his teachers. His teachers always would ask him to teach, to take the teaching seat, and eventually there was no one to teach him. He was on a path by himself, wandering and practicing extreme forms of asceticism in his search for enlightenment. One of his most common things to do was only eat 1 grain of rice a day. And of course, he almost died from that. But he abandoned these extreme courses and found out what is called the middle way between extremes of mortification and indulgence. Remember, he was born into a very wealthy family, so he had already experienced fine food in a beautiful home and people waiting on him hand and foot and everything he wanted. So he had experienced having nothing and almost starving to death, and he had experienced living in luxury. So he was determined that neither one of those was the way. It's reported that it was really hard to argue with the Buddha, roaring his lion's roar with such confidence agility, and obvious compassion for his listeners. He wanted everybody to wake up to experience this. Bhikkhu Bodhi says about this, the Buddha's claim to exclusively know the way to freedom does not even focus on practice, which is interesting, but it's about, again, understanding the nature of reality. And this is what separates the Dhamma from all other attempts to comprehend our human situation. Now it's starting to blend a little bit with modern psychology. There's a lot of overlap there about understanding the mind and behavior modification. But this was 2,600 years ago. And it's pretty interesting that those two things are now merging. As the sutta unfolds further, the Buddha shows that the essential key to liberation, a key that he alone has made available, is the teaching of anatta, or not self, which is the boundary line that marks the difference between his doctrine and the doctrine of other teachers at the time. And this still remains a distinguishing factor of Buddhism. The teaching of not self, or anatta, we started, was it this year, Joy, that you did the day long on anatta? It's such a mysterious topic, the study of not self. And along the way, we practice selflessness, kindness, compassion, joy for others, all the practices that get us out of ourself and more focused on other people and bringing joy to other people. And that is one of the ways to bring joy to ourselves. The sutta goes on to say that most folks follow one of two paths, and these paths are diametrically opposed to each other. And this is interesting. One path is the path of being. It's about eternalism and the essence of self, about spirit. The other is the path of non-being, or annihilism, of not believing in anything after death. So two extremes. And again, he teaches a middle way, which is a wonderful topic to explore. And I'm not prepared to go there tonight, but I would love to go there on another night. So these are really big ideas in the Lion's Roar Sutta. And I'm simply interested in knowing what the Lion's Roar was, what it was about. And so stay with me here. And please remember also that I'm not asking you to buy into or believe all the things that I'm relaying to you tonight, but simply to listen with an open mind, consider what might be appropriate for you to investigate further for yourself, or with a teacher, or in your Kalyana Mitra group, or even on your own. So back to the content of the roar. The Tathagata, which is what he called himself, further states that we must try to understand these two paths of being and not being that we bounce back and forth between, and see that they're erroneous extremes, and that only a middle way is what transcends an extremist view. That's where kindness and compassion comes in, because in our mind, we're so busy trying to figure it out. And he always is pushing us towards experience, closing your eyes, giving yourself over to whatever is happening, and being with it as a process that unfolds in some mysterious way. He winds up this section by saying that we must see and comprehend our clinging to be able to make headway with any of this. He says that clinging is the problem, the cause of all of our suffering and anxiety. And he lists 4 kinds of clinging: that we cling to pleasure naturally, that we cling to speculative views about ourselves and the world, we cling to rules and observances, and especially to the belief that certain rituals might deliver us into liberation. And we cling to a doctrine of self, a truly existent self. Of course, this last type of clinging is both this most subtle and the most elusive clinging to get rid of. He points out that even if we master the first 3, that rarely can one come to be able to release the notion of a self. It's a frightening thing. He knows and understands how difficult this last step is. He goes on to say, however, that a full understanding of all four kinds of clinging is required for true liberation, because in these four particular kinds of clinging is buried the root of the entire cycle of repeated samsara, existence, the wheel of becoming and suffering and dying and becoming and suffering and dying. And it's especially related to clinging to self. So it's a bit of a wild ride, don't you think? I mean, it's like standing right in front of a lion and have him roar into your face, blowing your hair back, all these really big truths that are kind of hard to hold. And once I got this deep into the sutta, it made perfect sense that it was called the lion's roar. He's telling all, he's not holding back. And I'm even leaving some parts out because we're so limited in time. Close your eyes for a minute, please. And imagine that you are sitting with your friends in the community 2,600 years ago, listening to this person, watching this person, this brilliant, humble, disciplined, compassionate, and fearless human being invite you to join him on this path. People around him had experienced him reading their minds, had experienced him hearing sounds far, far away, had experienced him demonstrating all kinds of interesting powers. Can you imagine what it would be like to be in the company of this person? He was, in the words of the Heart Sutta, gone, gone, gone beyond, beyond craving, beyond delusion, beyond suffering, and even beyond death. You can open your eyes. He's 80 years old when he gives this sutta, and this was the year that he died. He would never be reborn. In this sutta, he is spilling many, many seeds on his path, restating how they should be planted, how they should be nurtured, how we can grow to bear the fruits of lasting freedom. I've noticed that when a plant in my garden is getting ready to die, it throws out as many blooms and as many seeds as it can in its final season in order to raise the odds that there will be more of its kind. And it seems like in the Lion's Roar discourse, this is what our 80-year-old Buddha was doing, exhorting us, stay focused, keep energy, look at all that's waiting for you. Open your heart to this path. Andrew Olinsky says in conclusion, the Buddha was a tough but not impossible act to follow. And I love that because I feel that way. I don't think it's impossible to feel this reward is there with this practice, with this diligence, with this Sangha. I believe that we can wake up in this lifetime. So as we walk the path, let us not look up so much at the destination, high above in the mist, but carefully place one foot in front of the other. Thank you for your attention tonight. That's the Lion's Roar Sutta. And we have a little bit of announcements. We have time for questions or comments.